The year was 1847, and London shimmered beneath a brittle winter moon. The carriages had begun to arrive long before dusk, wheels grinding over the frost-bitten gravel that lined the entrance to Whitcomb Hall. Within, the ballroom glowed like a jeweled furnace, chandeliers blazing, violins sighing, and hundreds of voices humming beneath the gilded ceiling. They called it the season's grandest affair, yet for Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, the evening stretched before her like a slow punishment wrapped in silk. She stood near one of the great mirrors, crimson skirts cascading about her like a tide of velvet, her gloved fingers worrying at the stem of her glass. Around her, laughter rippled in polished tones, the kind of laughter that always stopped when she turned her head. She had learned to bear it with composure. She had been taught since girlhood that dignity must not tremble. Yet even as she smiled, she could feel their eyes upon her, the appraising glance of gentlemen who measured a woman's worth by her waist, the whispering debutantes whose silvery laughter was sharper than any blade. A pair of young lords passed close enough that she caught their voices. "A fortune like that," murmured one, "and no takers still? I dare say her inheritance outweighs her frame." The other chuckled. "Perhaps a match could be made with a man who values breadth, in estates, if not in brides." Their laughter merged with the music, yet the words sank deep, finding the old ache she had learned to hide behind fans and polite conversation. She turned her face slightly, pretending to admire the orchestra. The conductor lifted his baton, bows drew across strings, and the first notes of the waltz echoed through the hall. Her mother's voice came from behind her, soft but edged with authority. "You must dance, Eleanor. It does no good to linger at the wall like a neglected portrait." The Duchess of Whitcomb, tall, immaculate, and draped in diamonds, rested a hand on her daughter's arm. "Lord Pembroke has asked twice already. Do not refuse again." Eleanor inclined her head. "I would not wish to burden his lordship with my clumsiness." "Nonsense," her mother said, eyes narrowing. "He will be flattered by your attention. A duchess's invitation is a command, not a request." She obeyed as one obeys the chill. Lord Pembroke approached, his smile fixed with courteous obligation. He danced with precision, his arm a careful distance from her waist. When the music ended, he bowed stiffly and retreated without another word. Around them, couples laughed and glittered, the room alive with effortless beauty. Eleanor withdrew to the edge once more, her heart heavy, her reflection in the mirrored wall too large, too bright, too present. The night wore on until the air itself seemed perfumed with fatigue. As the final waltz began, she excused herself and stepped onto the terrace. The garden lay beyond, a white blur of frost and moonlight. The chill struck her cheeks, welcome and honest after the stifling heat of the ballroom. She breathed deeply, the air carrying the scent of roses long dead beneath the snow. Inside, she could still hear the orchestra, faint and distant, like the echo of a life she had never been meant to live. A butler's discreet cough broke her reverie. "Your carriage is ready, my lady." She nodded. "Inform my mother I shall retire early." The ride home was quiet. The Whitcomb carriage creaked through narrow streets, lanterns flickering against rain-slick glass. London blurred past, shops shuttered, silhouettes drifting through fog. Eleanor's gloved hands rested on her lap, fingers pressed together as if in prayer. She had once dreamed of love, of letters, of wild gardens, of a voice that might one day call her name with tenderness. But such dreams had faded into ritual, appearances at court, charity balls, endless fittings for gowns that grew tighter each season. Her thoughts turned, as they often did, to her late father. He had called her "my brave little Duchess," unbothered by the expectations that haunted noble daughters. He had believed her cleverness would one day outshine her beauty's absence. Yet since his passing, the world had been less kind. Her title, her estates, even her fortune had become a dowry too heavy for any man to lift without ridicule. At Whitcomb Hall, the great house stood cold and alert against the night. Servants moved like shadows through the corridors as Eleanor ascended the grand staircase. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, slender, regal, victorious. She paused before one, her grandmother, painted in youth, her figure delicate as porcelain, her expression faintly cruel. "You would have despised me," Eleanor murmured. The flickering candlelight seemed to agree. In her chamber, she dismissed her maid and unpinned her hair. Golden curls tumbled over her shoulders, free at last. She gazed into the mirror. Beneath the fine silk and the careful posture, there was a woman who had never been seen without judgment. She wondered, not for the first time, what it might feel like to be looked at with quiet admiration, to be regarded, not assessed. The following morning brought no reprieve. At breakfast, her mother unfolded the London Gazette and sighed. Another announcement from the Queen. Her Majesty will host the Winter Gala at Windsor in 3 weeks. Every household of standing is expected. Eleanor buttered her toast without enthusiasm. I presume I am to attend. Indeed. You have avoided enough seasons. People talk. They always talk, Eleanor said quietly. Her mother's eyes hardened. Then give them something finer to discuss. You will go to Windsor. You will wear that crimson gown. You will smile, and you will dance. If fortune favors us, perhaps a gentleman of influence will see past your— She stopped herself, but the word hung in the air like smoke. Sighs. Eleanor finished, voice calm. Yes, perhaps he will see past it, though I have ceased to hope for such vision. That night, the seamstresses returned to adjust the gown. Pins flashed under lamplight, fabric whispered against fabric, and Eleanor stood motionless as they worked. Rain lashed at the windows. Each stitch seemed to pull tighter around her ribs, as though the dress itself sought to contain her heart. When the last pin was set, she turned slightly, catching her reflection once more. The crimson silk gleamed richly in the candlelight, its color bold and defiant, a hue that demanded to be noticed. A maid entered with a message. The royal invitation had arrived, sealed in gold. Eleanor accepted it wordlessly, the wax still warm beneath her thumb. She broke it open. The handwriting was precise, regal, inevitable. She was summoned to Windsor Castle for the Queen's Winter Gala, to appear before Her Majesty and foreign guests of distinction. She folded the letter carefully, her pulse quickening despite herself. Windsor would be no different. The same whispers, the same cold smiles. Yet something within her stirred, a flicker of rebellion against the quiet surrender that had marked her days. She moved to the window. The rain had softened to mist, the lamps below glowing like watchful eyes. Somewhere, beneath the heavy sky, life continued with unfeigned joy. She whispered into the glass, her breath clouding the pain. I shall go. The words felt both heavy and freeing. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, a promise rather than a threat. Eleanor drew the curtain and extinguished the candles one by one. In the dark, she could almost believe that something was waiting, something unseen yet drawing nearer. For the first time in years, she did not dread the coming season. Instead, she imagined the sound of distant footsteps on marble floors, the faint stirring of air before a storm. And far away, across the channel, a carriage bearing Russian insignia cut through the night toward England's heart, its lone passenger gazing out into the rain, unaware that his journey would soon collide with that of the Duchess who no one dared to love. The night of the Winter Gala unfolded beneath a sky veiled in silver mist. Windsor Castle loomed ahead, its towers aflame with torchlight, carriages spilling from every direction as though all of England had gathered to celebrate its own perfection. Inside, the great ballroom glistened like a dream spun from crystal and gold. The air shimmered with perfume and candle smoke, violins murmuring through a waltz as lords and ladies turned in graceful orbits. And at the far end of that celestial whirl stood Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, crimson-clad and radiant beneath the chandeliers, an unwilling constellation in a universe that never wished to see her shine. The gown fit her precisely now, corseted and sculpted, every fold calculated to disguise what society deemed too much. She had learned long ago to armor herself with elegance, to transform ridicule into majesty. Still, her heart thudded with quiet dread as she entered, escorted by her mother, who whispered perfunctory greetings to old friends before drifting away. Eleanor felt the usual hush that accompanied her presence, an invisible ripple of curiosity, pity, and polite derision. She pretended not to notice, keeping her chin lifted as though buoyed by invisible grace. A fan flicked open nearby. Two ladies whispered, disguising mockery as admiration. "So bold a color," said one. "It rather draws the eye, does it not?" "Indeed," replied the other. "One cannot help but notice." Their laughter fluttered like lace, insincere and cruel. Eleanor's lips curved faintly, the gesture a shield honed through years of battle. The orchestra changed tempo, and a herald announced the arrival of foreign dignitaries, envoys from Russia, Prussia, and France. A murmur swept the hall. Among the newcomers, a tall figure moved with deliberate calm. His hair was dark, his bearing austere, his mask silver and half-shaped like the moon's edge. He bowed before the queen with the precision of a soldier but the quiet of a poet. His name passed through the air like a rumor. Count Adrian Volkov, Russian envoy to the crown. Eleanor's gaze lingered before she realized it. He was not handsome in the English sense. His features too stark, his mouth too solemn. But there was something about the stillness of him, the way he seemed untouched by the pageantry that consumed everyone else. When his eyes, gray and reflective as winter water, briefly found hers across the room, her breath faltered. It was no courtly glance of curiosity or politeness. It was a look of recognition, as if he had seen her before, long ago, in a place without mirrors or judgment. She turned away quickly, convincing herself it was chance. The evening pressed forward under the hum of conversation. Gentlemen approached, made shallow remarks about the weather or her gown, and withdrew before the third exchange. Eleanor endured them all with practiced serenity. It was nearly midnight when the queen rose and announced the commencement of the masked waltz. Every guest reached for their mask, some sequined, some feathered, each a small rebellion against the tyranny of appearance. Eleanor's was of silver filigree, delicate and cold in her hand. She held it loosely, uncertain if she wished to hide or reveal. Then he was there. Count Volkov stood before her, bowing just deeply enough to be courteous but not ostentatious. "Your Grace," he said, voice low and faintly accented, "the hall is full of beauty, yet none seem brave enough to claim it. Will you grant me a dance?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing around. The invitation hung between them like a dare. "You are too kind, my lord. Surely there are younger ladies who would better suit your steps." He regarded her steadily. "I have danced with ghosts all evening. I prefer a partner of substance." Her heart beat once, hard and disobedient. The murmurs had already begun, gasps behind fans, curious stares from across the floor. Declining now would seem both proud and wounded. She nodded once. "Very well, my lord. One dance." He extended his gloved hand, and she placed hers upon it. The contact was startlingly gentle, not the polite formality she expected, but something quieter, reverent almost. As they stepped into the slow waltz, the crowd parted like water. Every motion drew eyes. The crimson of her gown flared against the dark navy of his coat, their movements a study in contrast and defiance. For a time, neither spoke. The music wound around them, carrying their silence like a secret. Eleanor kept her gaze lowered, conscious of the murmuring gallery. "They are watching," she whispered. "They always watch," he replied. "Let them learn something worth seeing." She risked meeting his eyes. "You court scandal, Count. Then scandal must be lonely," he murmured. "Allow me to keep it company." Her breath caught, though she managed a smile. The warmth of his palm through her glove felt almost forbidden. The world seemed to narrow. No court, no music, only the rhythm of their steps and the strange certainty that this moment was meant to happen. When the waltz ended, applause rippled politely. Adrian bent close, his lips near her ear, and said softly, "You're beautiful." It was not the flattery of a diplomat nor the gallantry of a suitor. It was spoken as fact, unadorned and irrevocable. The words broke something in her, something brittle she had long mistaken for composure. She drew back slightly, eyes wide, but he was already bowing, his expression unreadable. The air changed. Whispers swelled into waves. Somewhere a woman stifled laughter. Somewhere else, a man muttered that the Russian had gone mad. Eleanor's mother appeared from the crowd, face rigid with alarm. "What have you done?" she hissed, seizing her daughter's arm. "Do you wish to feed the gossip for months?" "I danced," Eleanor said quietly. "Nothing more." "Nothing more?" "He made a spectacle of you." Her mother's voice trembled between fury and fear. "You will leave. Now." Obediently, Eleanor excused herself and allowed to be escorted out. Yet as she descended the marble steps, the words followed her, echoing beneath the vaults, "You're beautiful." They pulsed within her like a forbidden melody, at once impossible and true. Back in her carriage, she sat motionless, staring out at the castle's glowing windows. The rain began again, a soft patter against the glass. She thought of his face, those calm, reflective eyes, the silver mask that gleamed like moonlight. It seemed absurd that one sentence could undo years of self-defense, yet it had. For the first time, she did not feel monstrous. She felt seen. Days passed before the scandal reached her estate in Kentmere. The newspapers hinted at a singular infatuation between the Northern Duchess and a certain foreign envoy. Her mother refused callers, silenced the servants, and burned the printed columns in the hearth. Eleanor, meanwhile, kept to her study, pretending indifference. But one evening, a sealed envelope arrived, its wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. "Forgive my boldness. The world sees you through mirrors. I saw you through light." No signature, only that single line written in precise, foreign script. She pressed the page to her chest, closing her eyes. Outside, the wind moaned against the eaves, and a strange peace settled in her heart, a fragile, perilous hope. That night, before the fire dimmed, she lifted her hand to her throat where his breath had brushed her ear, and whispered into the quiet room, "Perhaps beauty was never meant to be thin." Far away, in the guest chambers reserved for foreign dignitaries, Count Volkov stood by his window, staring at the same storm sweeping over England's fields. In his hand, a duplicate of that letter, its ink still drying. Neither of them knew what would follow, but both understood that something irreversible had begun. Rain battered the windows of Whitcomb Hall that evening, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. Inside, the air was heavy with the perfume of dying roses and old secrets. Eleanor sat by the fireplace, her silk gown pooled like molten silver around her feet. The flame's glow danced across her face, highlighting both the strength in her jaw and the softness in her eyes. The grand clock above the mantel struck 7, each toll echoing her solitude. It had been 3 days since Count Volkov's unexpected visit, 3 days since he had taken her gloved hand in the moonlit garden and whispered words that had refused to fade. "You're beautiful." They replayed in her mind like a forbidden hymn. Yet, she could not decide whether to believe them or fear them. Every compliment she had ever received had carried a price, but his voice, steady, quiet, unhurried, had held no trace of mockery. It had unsettled her precisely because it seemed real. Her maid, Clara, entered silently, carrying a folded letter sealed in red wax. "From London, Your Grace," she said, setting it upon the side table. Eleanor nodded, though her heart thumped in a strange rhythm. The seal bore the insignia of the Russian delegation. She broke it open. The letter was brief, written in a firm, masculine hand. "Forgive my boldness, Duchess. Might I call upon you tomorrow before noon? A. Volkov." Eleanor's breath caught. He was returning. For what purpose, she could not guess. But beneath the surprise flickered something she dared not name, anticipation. By morning, the estate stirred with quiet curiosity. Gossip moved faster than servants could sweep the floors. A foreign count, handsome and widowed, seeking the company of the Duchess who had long been scorned? It was the sort of intrigue high society feasted upon. Eleanor ignored the whispers as she descended the marble staircase, her pale blue gown modest yet elegant. When Volkov was shown into the drawing-room, he bowed with an old-world grace. His dark coat was damp from rain, his boots gleaming with recent polish. The firelight caught faint scars at his temple, marks of a life not lived in comfort. "Your Grace," he said softly, his accent rolling through each syllable like smoke. "You look radiant this morning." "Flattery so early in the day, Count," she replied, managing a smile. "Truth requires no proper hour." The simplicity of his tone disarmed her. They sat, speaking first of neutral things, the Queen's charity projects, the progress of the railway, the dreariness of the English sky. But conversation soon drifted deeper, as if neither could resist the pull of honesty. He told her of his late wife, lost to fever in St. Petersburg, and how the Russian winter had never seemed as cold as the silence she left behind. Eleanor listened, seeing in his sorrow a reflection of her own invisible wounds. When he asked, "Do you ever grow tired of pretending not to feel?" her breath trembled. No one had ever dared to ask her that. "Every hour of my life," she admitted quietly. "They look at me and see a title, a shape, an object to ridicule. I learned long ago that silence protects me better than pride." Volkov leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Silence may protect, but it also imprisons." The words struck her harder than she expected. Before she could reply, the door burst open. Lord Pembroke, a suitor once persistent, now bitterly rejected, strode in without invitation. His smirk was a knife. "Your Grace," he drawled, "forgive the intrusion. I hear you're entertaining foreign company." His eyes flicked toward Volkov, dripping disdain. "A widow chaser, is it? Perhaps he mistook you for a wealthy dowager." Eleanor's face flushed. "You forget yourself, Lord Pembroke." Volkov rose, calm but dangerous. "You will apologize to the lady." Pembroke laughed. "A foreigner giving orders in my queen's land? How quaint." Before another insult could form, Volkov's fist met his jaw with precise, brutal elegance. Pembroke staggered backward, clutching his face in disbelief. "You'll regret this," he spat, storming out, his pride bleeding faster than his lip. Silence fell again, thick and alive. Eleanor's heart raced, both shocked and strangely exhilarated. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "I could not stand by while he dishonored you," Volkov said simply, straightening his coat. She looked at him then, not as a stranger, not as a foreign count, but as a man who had seen her worth when no one else had dared. "You risked your reputation." "I have survived far worse than gossip, Duchess." The faintest smile curved her lips. "Eleanor," she corrected softly. "If we are to defy society, you may as well call me by my name." His eyes warmed, as though her name itself carried sunlight. "Then you must call me Adrian." The sound of it lingered between them, intimate and dangerous. That afternoon, as word of the altercation spread through the corridors of nobility, invitations to Eleanor began to dwindle. The Duchess, once merely pitted, was now scandalous, linked with a foreign man who fought for her honor. Yet for the first time, she did not shrink beneath the weight of public judgment. Instead, she stood taller. She met Adrian again 2 evenings later, at the edge of the estate gardens, where fog curled around the hedgerows like ghosts of forgotten lovers. He brought her a single white rose, its petals glistening with dew. "In my country," he said, "we give white roses to those who bring peace to troubled hearts." She took it carefully, her voice barely a whisper. "Peace is a strange gift, Count Volkov." "Adrian," he reminded her gently. "Adrian," she echoed, the name tasting like courage. He looked at her then, not as a duchess burdened by ridicule, but as a woman awakening to her own light. "You think yourself unworthy of love," he murmured. "But perhaps love has been waiting for you to stop apologizing for existing." Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden. For years she had worn dignity like armor, never realizing it had also kept her untouched. In his presence, the walls began to crumble. When he bowed to take his leave, she caught his hand. "Will you return?" As he disappeared into the mist, Eleanor felt the strangest warmth in her chest, a quiet, terrifying hope. The same woman who had once hidden behind silk and sorrow now stood in the cold garden, clutching a rose, whispering his name to the wind. And for the first time in her life, the night did not feel lonely. The rain had not stopped since that night. Windsor's marble terraces gleamed beneath a pale dawn, and the world seemed to hold its breath for the scandal that had gripped it. The Duchess of Whitcomb, once invisible, had become the name on every tongue. Some said she'd bewitched the Russian envoy. Others claimed he sought her fortune. But those who saw them together knew the truth lay somewhere softer, more dangerous, something that could not be undone by whispers. Lady Eleanor stood by the window of her estate, the crimson gown folded across her arms. It had been the gown of her ruin and her awakening. Outside, the wet earth shimmered with morning fog. Behind her, the door opened without ceremony. She did not need to turn to know his step. the careful weight of a man who carried both duty and guilt. "Adrian," she breathed, her voice breaking on the name. He stepped closer, his cloak damp from the rain, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "They have recalled me to Petersburg. I am to depart within the hour." Her composure wavered. So this is how such tales end. With silence. He took her hand, cold and trembling. "No." "With courage. You must know I came to England a broken man, sent to charm courts and broker treaties, not to fall in love with a woman who shamed them all by daring to exist without apology." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she did not lower her gaze. "And yet you did." "And yet I did," he whispered. "Eleanor, I love you. Not as they define love, not as some fragile ornament to display, but as a truth that humbles me. If I must return, it will not be as the man who danced with you once, but as one who carries your name like armor." Her lips trembled. "And what of me? When they speak my name, they will mock me still." "Then let them," he said fiercely. "Let them speak, and in their cruelty they will immortalize you. The Duchess who defied them all." The grandfather clock struck 9. The sound echoed like a verdict. He bent, pressing his forehead against hers. "If fate is kind, we shall meet again. If not, know that one man, once, saw you as you truly are." Outside, the carriage wheels splashed through puddles. She watched him go until the road vanished in the mist. Weeks passed before a letter arrived, sealed with his crest. It contained no declarations, no promises, only a pressed sprig of lavender and 6 words, "You were never meant to hide." Years later, the portrait of Duchess Eleanor Whitcomb would hang in the royal gallery, painted in crimson silk, her eyes alight with quiet defiance. Visitors would pause before it, whispering of the woman who had once danced beneath the chandeliers and changed the meaning of beauty itself. And somewhere in the folds of history, her name endured, Eleanor, the Duchess who was loved once and forever.